Picture this, a cheese crafted at 16,000 feet up in the remote Himalayas, taking home gold all the way in Brazil. Sounds crazy, right? Welcome, everyone. Okay, let's dive into this explainer. Today, we're unpacking a really fascinating story that begins with a surprising international cheese award, but quickly opens the door to understanding the deeply complex socioeconomic and environmental landscape of Ladakh's Changthang region. If you're studying for the civil services and taking notes on regional development, or if you're just tracking indigenous livelihoods, this is a perfect, comprehensive case study of how ancient traditions meet modern global and ecological challenges.
Here's our roadmap for today. We'll start with the golden cheese of Ladakh, then look at the tradition of yak herding, followed by the climate and economic crises hitting the region. Then we'll cover government and local initiatives, and finally wrap up with the path to sustainability. This structure will give us a complete picture of the historical context, the current crises, and the future interventions.
Section 1. The Golden Cheese of Ladakh, an International Victory. We're kicking things off with an unlikely triumph that took a humble, indigenous product from the remote peaks of the Himalayas all the way to global recognition.
To really get why this is such a huge deal, you have to imagine the sensory extremes of Ladakh. Picture standing on the Changthang Plateau. It's a high-altitude, cold desert with practically no vegetation. You are sitting at a dizzying 16,600 feet. The sun is just barely coming up, and the temperature has plummeted to a freezing 1 degree Celsius. This unforgiving geography? That's just a normal Tuesday for 36-year-old Thenlay Nurboo. He's a yak herder whose traditional cheese completely defied the odds and geographical barriers to win a gold medal in Brazil. Specifically, Nurboo's traditional yak cheese, which is known locally as chhurpe, snagged a gold medal at the 4th edition of the Mundial de Queijo do Brasil. Just think about that contrast for a second. You have this incredibly rustic, grueling life of a high-altitude nomad colliding with the prestige of a massive, biennial, international culinary competition in South America. Obviously, Nurboo couldn't jet off to attend in person, but his product successfully put Ladakh and the sheer grit of its nomadic herders firmly on the global cheese map.
Moving to Section 2. Tradition of yak herding, a high-altitude life. To really understand why this victory matters so much, we need to look at the historical context and the incredibly demanding daily realities of the people who actually make it.
Yak herding is quite frankly an exercise in sheer endurance. Out of a family herd of about 100 yaks, 50 to 60 are milked every single day. And here's the kicker, each yak only produces about 1 to 1.5 liters of this super rich milk. So to get a total yield of just 60 liters, it's an entirely manual, backbreaking process. We're talking 4 to 5 hours every single morning, starting at 5:30 a.m. in the freezing cold. This extreme labor-to-yield ratio is exactly why pastoral nomadicism historically relied so heavily on communal effort, which sets the stage for a major demographic shift we're going to discuss in just a moment.
Now, what's really interesting about this is the science and history embedded in the cheese-making process itself. Making chhurpe starts by heating fresh milk to about 32 to 35 degrees Celsius and adding a natural culture. You let that ferment overnight. The next morning, it gets churned for a solid hour to separate the butter from the lassi. And historically, this is so cool. This churning was done using a scalpa. That's a traditional churn crafted out of a goat or sheep skin. Talk about the absolute resourcefulness of nomadic life, right?
After the lassi is boiled down into this ricotta-like cheese, it's drained, dried, and formed into a dough. But what actually gives this winning cheese its complex character? Well, it all comes down to the environment. The yaks graze on a natural diet of Himalayan medicinal plants. This specific regional biodiversity infuses the milk with these really distinct earthy notes, making it a prime candidate for a geographical indication or GI tag. Plus that signature smoky flavor, it's entirely authentic. It comes directly from the traditional use of yak dung as cooking fuel right inside the herders' tents.
But amidst this awesome micro-success story, there's a really pressing question looming over the region. Where have all the yaks gone? This question forces us to pivot. We have to shift away from this story of culinary triumph and look at the macro-level regional crises that are actively threatening to wipe out this traditional lifestyle entirely.
Section 3. Climate and Economic Crises, a Dual Threat. The indigenous communities of the Changthang region are currently being squeezed by two massive converging forces.
The statistics here are just stark. Yak rearing has reportedly plummeted by nearly 50% across the Changthang region. Let that sink in. Half. What we're witnessing is a massive wave of outmigration. Young people in Ladakh are understandably being drawn away from these grueling traditional careers. They're moving toward what look like better employment opportunities, fundamentally shifting the region from a pastoral economy to a service-based one. Think government jobs, seasonal tourism, or driving taxis. To put it in perspective, Nurboo's family is literally the only one still selling yak milk in their entire village.
And this brilliantly illustrates the economic paradox driving that 50% decline. Just look at the wool prices. Pashmina, which is Ladakh's most prized export, commands anywhere from 6,000 to 8,000 rupees per kilo. In brutal, almost heartbreaking contrast, yak wool sells for a mere 600 rupees per kilo. It's a tragic disparity, especially when you consider that woven yak wool is exceptionally durable, it's waterproof, and it's historically used to make the traditional Rebo tents. These tents are absolutely 100% essential for nomadic survival during harsh winters, yet the commercial value of the wool remains incredibly low.
Compounding this massive economic disparity is an immediate environmental crisis. Yaks are raised at staggering altitudes, between 13,000 and 17,000 feet, and climate change is actively rewriting the rules of this fragile landscape. We're seeing retreating glaciers and declining snowfall. Now, locals do note an increase in rainfall, which, sure, temporarily greens up the mountain slopes, but this shift in precipitation actively disrupts the traditional, centuries-old grazing calendars of these nomadic communities. Without a sustained snowpack, the vital freshwater springs that the animals and herders absolutely depend on face the very real, long-term threat of drying up completely.
Let's move to Section 4 and see how this builds: government and local initiatives, policy and interventions. With all these crises mounting, how are authorities and herders actually fighting back?
On the government side, we are seeing some really targeted interventions to help these indigenous products meet modern international hygiene standards. For instance, the Animal Husbandry Department stepped in to assist Nurboo directly. Previously, this cheese was just dried on parachute cloth right on the ground, which obviously left it exposed to dust and birds. So the department provided modern cheese drying shelves. This elevates the product off the ground, allowing the chhurpe to dry faster and so much more cleanly. It's a small but absolutely vital policy step for achieving global commercial viability.
Meanwhile, on the grassroots level, local advocacy is really gaining organization and momentum. Nurboo is part of a 13-member Yak Herders Association that formed about 5 years ago. Their demands are crystal clear, and they're laser-focused on the way forward for regional development. First, they want heavy promotion of yak-based dairy products. Interestingly, they are also advocating for the legalization of yak meat. The economic rationale here is pretty solid. A legal meat market would create a secondary income stream from older yaks and significantly reduce winter fodder pressure, potentially doubling farmers' incomes. Finally, they're calling for a national research center for yak to systematically aid in long-term husbandry development.
Section 5, the path to sustainability, beyond the cheese. What do these global awards and local initiatives actually mean for the future of indigenous communities in Ladakh? I really want you to take a second and read this quote from Nurboo. He says, "If I had sold all my yaks and invested in tippers or JCBs like many others, it would not have been sustainable." This hits the nail on the head when we talk about economic resilience. Preserving traditional food systems isn't just about, protecting a piece of heritage. It provides genuine year-round food and economic security. Compare this to the extreme fragility of the tourism sector. As we all saw during the pandemic, tourism can come to a screeching, complete standstill. But the daily work of the herders, providing essential sustenance in one of the toughest landscapes on Earth, that continued unabated.
The gold medal has absolutely proven that traditional livelihoods have immense value on a global stage. But as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a final thought that really highlights the classic development versus preservation debate. As chhurpe moves from a food rooted in basic, rugged survival to a celebrated global luxury item discussed in the same breath as Gruyere, will its indigenous nature survive untouched? Will achieving wider commercial success force these traditional communal methods to evolve into westernized techniques just to meet international scale? Or can that delicate balance of authentic regional development actually be maintained? It is a fascinating tension for sure, and something we must all keep a close eye on. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep learning, and I'll catch you next time.